If the Epstein Files were truly released, then nothing would be missing, nothing selectively redacted, and nothing just quietly deleted. Yet millions of pages are still withheld, and key photos vanished, and survivors say their own testimony is gone, and officials swear nothing is hidden, which leaves only two logical possibilities: that either the DOJ is catastrophically incompetent at transparency, or it's expertly just hiding evidence while pretending not to. And the reason this matters is simple. Innocent systems don't fear daylight, but guilty narratives always do. And in January 2026 made the DOJ story collapse on a contract with time itself, as if the late January supplemental release were meant to cure prior non-compliance, it should have reduced reductions, restored missing files, and reconciled earlier representations about what existed and what did not. Yet instead, it delivered recycled pages with the heavier blackout blocks, confirmed that previously non-existent records suddenly do exist, admitting that earlier assurances were false, which traps the DOJ in a close logical loop that either the department misled the Congress and the public before January 2026, or is misleading them now. And because both statements cannot be true at once, every new release functions less like a transparency and more like an evidentiary admission that someone is managing optics rather than obeying a law, a strategy so clumsy that it insults a basic reasoning. Because when a records release generates more contradictions than documents, it's no longer a disclosure, it's a self-exposure. And this is where a DOJ's victim first story collapses, as if a transparency were meant to serve survivors, their testimony would be central and their identities protected. Yet survivors report the opposite. Names of abused women visible, their statements missing or erased, and the man accused of abusing them hidden behind reductions. So when a DOJ leadership claims it's always concerned about the victims, the statement defeats itself, because concern that results in harm is not concern at all, and the binary is unforgiving. Either the survivors across the country are collectively lying about what they cannot find in the files, or the DOJ is misrepresenting what it released. And the omission makes the intent obvious, as victim impact statements, tip line calls, and FBI interviews vanish, while peripheral material survive, and meaning this was not a neutral over-reduction, but selective disclosure, and the logic tightens further. Either the missing evidence were never just mattered, in which case victims never mattered, or it was withheld, in which case Congress and the public were misled, and that's hypocrisy. And you cannot claim to protect the victims while forcing them to prove their own existence in the record. You cannot just call black ink transparency, and you cannot demand trust when every procedural choice signals the same priority: shield the powerful, expose the vulnerable, and pretend those two things are compatible. And then emails with alibis when the record is the excuse. If a public denials were true, the emails would be sterile or non-existent. Yet the files show casual coordination, social planning, and money movement after Epstein convictions, which collapses the alibis on a contract alone. Musk said his Epstein ties were minimal, yet 2012 exchange jokes about helicopter logistics and the wildest party on our island, and so on, followed by visit coordination into 2013 after Epstein was a convinced sex offender. So the logic is binary and fatal. Either the distancing was performative, or the judgment was so reckless it renders the denial meaningless. And Howard Lutnick claimed he and his wife were involved by 2005, and evolved never to be in a room with Epstein again. Yet emails played the family lunch on Epstein private island in December 2012, with a nice thank you and follow-up, which leaves no middle grounds. And either he lied about the cutoff, or he knowingly just brought his family to dine with a convinced predator. And Peter Mandelson, after Epstein 2009 release, money follows just quietly to Mandelson household, labeled as a loan to avoid gift tax and Mandelson instruction, which answers its own question. Innocent relationships do not require camouflage, and none of this has produced consequences, and that's the tell. And each figure said, I hardly knew him, yet each record shows familiarity they felt compelled to minimize, which is the inference that matters. And people don't downplay relationships they believe are benign. They downplay the ones they know look bad, ones written down. And Prince Andrew insists he served ties with Epstein after a 2008 conviction, and his 2010 New York visit was merely to end a relationship. Yet the files place him at an intimate December 2010 dinner party inside Epstein townhouse, complete with curated guests and social invitations, which destroys the narrative on the contract alone, because people who go to say goodbye do not host stories, leaving a binary with no escape. Either the farewell story is false, or Andrew's idea of just severing ties includes the cocktails and the network, and it gets worse. Emails from 2010 show Epstein just requesting a private time in London, and a private entry responding with an invitation to dine at a Buckingham Palace after Epstein conviction. An act so incompatible with Andrew's later claims of disgust that one of them must be fiction. And because a man who truly believed Epstein reprehensible that doesn't offer a palace privacy, and one who does is writing history, and the photos in the mails close the loop. And newly released images show Andrew is in overly intimate poses with a young woman alongside Ghislaine Maxwell, and contemporaneous emails reveal Andrew eagerly accepting introductions to a beautiful woman arranged by Epstein and signed under lies like the Duke, which collapses any claim of ignorance or distance. And since secrecy and pseudonym do not coexist with innocence, Sarah Ferguson follows the same pattern. She publicly declared she abhorred Epstein crimes after accepting his money. Yet, emails with Epstein pressing her to publicly rehabilitate him, just treating financial help as leverage. And records indicate she maintained a contract even after his conviction, including interactions involving her daughters, a contradiction that follows only two explanations: that either the moral just outrage came after for PR purposes, or it never governed her conduct at all, and jailhouse mystery when the official story is itself. If Epstein deaths were straightforward as official claim, the evidence would be stable, consistent, and boring. Yet each new record release does the opposite. Reviving cameras that were supposedly dead, producing footage from angles we were told did not exist, and contradicting prior statements' explanations, so the logic collapses immediately. That contradiction tightens around Bill Barr. As Barr assures the public, he personally reviewed the videos, just proving no one entered Epstein's house area. And yet later, analysis confirms that the footage available at the time could not be definitely show that, meaning his certainty had no evidentiary foundation, and the binary is unavoidable. Either the Barr overstated what the video showed, or a clear footage existed and was not disclosed. And either scenario is compatible with the honest investigation. And the surrounding coincidences finish the job. A guard's asleep, logs falsified, cameras failing except when they didn't, and the footage previously beyond the normal retention limits, and the previously missing video later just found by the FBI. And this is not a neutral pattern of a bad luck, it's a structural failure that defeats Occam's razor. And because when every safeguard fails at the same moment, and the explanation keeps changing, and the simplest inferences is not a conspiracy, but incompetence so extreme it becomes indistinguishable from concealment. And that's why the case won't die. You cannot just repeatedly say the case closed while opening the fatal record yourself. And you cannot demand a public trust when each correction proves the last assurance false. Because at the point, the problem is not a speculation, it's a logic, and the official story requires too many mutually exclusive truths to be believed. If the DOJ had satisfied its legal duty under Epstein Files Act, it would not need a scapegoat. Yet instead of explaining missing pages and the vanishing files, officials flooded the list with all photos of Bill Clinton, of a 20-year-old image, and answers a present-day failure, and which is a textbook non sequitur. Because Clinton's past associations, true or false, do nothing to explain why the DOJ missed deadlines or redacted records and quietly deleted files in 2026. That election backfires immediately. And the Clinton's camp correctly just noted that this isn't about Bill Clinton, and they are right by pure logic. Either the DOJ complied with the statute or it didn't. And the pointing at a political opponent cannot just convert non-compliance into compliance. It only signals a panic, since institutions confident in their records do not just change the subject. And the stunt became absurd. Once the Democrats released their own photo set and highlighted what DOJ officials tried to erase, a photo of Donald Trump with Epstein that briefly appeared online and then vanished with no explanation, which collapses the pretense instantly. Because letting the most politically explosive image while keeping others is not neutrality, it's a curation, and curation is the opposite of transparency. That's the end game. One side screams Clinton, and the other side screams Trump. And the DOJ hides behind the noise, but the logic doesn't care about party labels. Selective disclosure is a propaganda, not transparency. And any institution that claims to seek truth while revealing only what harms its enemies is admitting without saying so that a full record is too damaging to release. Finally, here is a verdict, and it's not emotional, it's logical. If the Epstein Files were truly released, nothing would be still missing. If no one was being protected, nothing politically explosive would vanish. And if officials told the truth yesterday, they wouldn't need to revise it today. Yet we have missing pages, deleted photos, and shifting timelines, and officials' contradictions themselves across the releases, which means the system fails its own test. Because an innocent narrative doesn't just require a constant correction. They are trapped by their own words. The DOJ says it's protected the victims. Victims say they were exposed. A prince say he cut ties, then offers palace dinners. And the billionaires say barely knew him, then write like co-host. And officials say case closed, then reopens evidence himself. And this is the simplest inference imaginable. So either reality is fake or the people explaining it are lying. And since the documents are real and answer is obvious, so listen to the pattern because it's a tell. When facts help them, they release them. And when facts hurt them, they redact them, delay them or delete them, then accuse critics of conspiracy for noticing, which is not transparency, it's narrative management, and anyone still pretending otherwise is not confused. They are complicit. This is where it turns absurd. Cameras that didn't work suddenly do, footage that didn't exist suddenly appears, and the relationship that were revolting suddenly involves lunches and money. Every correction makes a story less believable, not more, which is why the case refuses to die, because lies require maintenance, while truth just sits there. Innocent systems don't fear daylight, they don't delete files, they don't revise timelines, and they don't need distractions only guilt stories do. Checkmate. So if you follow the logic and saw the trap close, like this video, subscribe for more, and leave a comment saying which part broke their story. Because every comment forces this further into the open, and the daylight is the one thing that guilty narratives can't survive.